Hey everyone, got a quick one for you today. I think it's going to be a quick one. I had a conversation. You never know with me. I never know. I never know. I never know if I'm going to be quick or not. But I was having a conversation this Sunday after service, and it had kind of mirrored a conversation I'd had earlier in the week. And so I thought I would take a minute to address the topic in general. It wasn't on my radar. It wasn't something I was planning on doing. But that's what I want to do with this channel is just kind of address things as they come up and have some sort of rhythm with that as well, responding to things as they come up. So um, the idea is certainty, and there's a whole study out there called epistemology, and it's all about how we can know things and how we think that we know things. I'm probably saying it wrong, but I'm not an epistemologist, so you actually guys on the internet can correct me. But it's a study of knowing things, and there's a tendency, I think, in the church, especially, to feel as though we need to be certain about stuff, which actually is kind of funny because there's a couple of cartoonish sort of or caricatures of the idea of faith. I've covered one of them in a previous episode. I talked about how, and this is a response to the idea of Richard Dawkins' understanding of faith, and I think he misses the mark. Because I don't think faith is what he thinks it is, like kind of a blind leap. And so there's this sense in which faith is a blind leap. That's the typical caricature we see from skeptics and atheists. And then there's this opposite sort of problem where you're looking for absolute certainty. And that kind of flies in the face of faith as well, because faith is a confidence because of what we see in that which we don't. So you might say it's somewhat evidentiary. I mean, it's like there's reasons for believing. Hebrews 11:1 provides us a good definition, a good starting place for what does faith mean in the Christian economy of things or the Christian worldview. And faith is neither hopelessness, throwing blind leap, nor is it a absolute certainty. And I think those are two things we ought to avoid. Dan Wallace says the same effectively when it comes to textual criticism and how we know that what we have now in the New Testament specifically, how we know what we have now is what they wrote then. And that science is called, and it is a science. That science is called textual criticism, and it's the methodology, the academic methodology we have. And this is not just for Christian or biblical text, but this is also for any sort of ancient text where we have handwritten copies that we're trying to get back to the originals. Especially when those handwritten copies don't all say the same exact thing, and you have what's called textual variants. So if you have 10 copies of something, that's great. You have great attestation for that thing that you are trying to get back to the original. But what do you do when you have between the 10 copies you have 100 different variants? What's the original? How do you know what the original is? Well, there's a science called textual criticism. But of that discipline, Daniel Wallace says that we should pursue neither certainty nor sort of hopelessness. And I'm not quoting him exactly as he says it, but it's something along those lines. And I think the same is true, really in any field, in any subject, is that we should avoid feeling like we have to be certain about things. And so I was in discussion Sunday after the service with somebody where we were just talking about what it feels like when you find out that you're wrong about something, or it can be scary, I guess, to back up a step. It can be kind of scary to think about, what if I open the door to this? If I open the door to the possibility that I could be wrong about my view of, let's say, eschatology, could I not also be open to the idea that I'm wrong about all of it in general, about Christianity in its entirety? Well, of course you could. Of course, that's a possibility, but not one that the Bible hasn't addressed in any way. I mean, you think about Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. He says, if it's demonstrated that the resurrection didn't happen and Christ is not risen, then we are of all men to be most pitied, and we're still in our sins. We haven't found the hope that we thought that we found in the Jesus that we thought we found hope in. So, he's saying effectively, he's saying that if it can be demonstrated that Christ has not been risen, then I'm walking away. And he was open to that, at least insofar as the resurrection being a falsifiable claim. But of course he didn't, and he ended up writing a quarter of the New Testament and the greatest champion for the faith in the first century, but and probably ever. But the idea is that we open ourselves up when we seek to be truth seekers. We open ourselves up to all sorts of things that can be scary, and it's when I had this conversation with a couple of people, it helped me sort of remember where I was, a number of years ago, 20 some years ago, in sort of just getting into some of these questions and asking questions about my faith, asking, is my faith even correct? And that is certainly can be scary territory, because when you've lived your life a certain way, you don't want to find out that you were wrong. But I think we need to be willing to. And here's the thing. I have had more rewarding conversations that followed my humble admission that I did not know than ever followed from my certain my claims of certainty that I do know, and that matters. I mean, if we want to open up the conversations to people who don't yet believe and might be persuaded of that, it's not helping the cause of Christianity for us to be certain about something and have never any doubt, and then find out that you're wrong anyway. I think with everything we should just go in honestly. And so if you're talking to fellow Christians about, let's say, a political thing, and you're not as well versed on a subject as you think that you are, and perhaps you find yourself having to defend a position you've always held, but without much substance behind it, because you've never really studied it, you took it for granted. That's an opportunity. It's a real human opportunity to say, you know what, actually, I've never really looked into it as strongly as I thought, and I kind of took for granted. I grew up believing some things or whatever it might be, and you're just honest with it. I think honesty goes a long way. Asking questions usually goes further than making statements. Of course, we have to make statements. We can't just ask questions endlessly. We need to locate ourselves on the map of truth and what there is to know, and to define our worldview and how we navigate life. But I think to anybody that's struggling with the idea of not being certain about what you believe, you don't need to be. You don't have to be 100% certain. I remember the prayer is at Mark chapter 9. And I'm not editing this video. I'm going to post it as it is. So, but the story of the guy comes to Jesus and says, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." I have no idea if I'm right about that reference. But I believe, help my unbelief. And you think about John the Baptist, who was in prison, and he's saying, how do I know that Jesus is truly the Messiah? John the Baptist is the front runner of the Messiah. He's the one announcing, proclaiming that the Messiah has come and the kingdom of God is at hand. And yet when he's in prison, he starts having these doubts, and Jesus didn't reprimand him for having doubts. He didn't reprimand him for having questions about his faith. In fact, he said to the people that came to him, the messengers from John, he said, "You go back and tell John. You tell him that the blind are being made to see, that the lame are being made to walk, the dumb are being made to speak, and all these things, these miracles, the sick are being made well. Those are the things you should go tell John the Baptist to bolster his faith." To help him in his faith, and not to chide him for having moments of doubt. Those will come. And if you're looking to live a life so certain that you'll never have any doubts, I promise you've never really looked into or thought about things very thoroughly. And that's not a knock on you, but it is, I guess, somewhat of a rebuke of how little little time you spent looking into these things. And don't overwhelm yourself. Whatever the topic is at hand right now, let that be the thing you look into. You can't, my boss has an expression, don't boil the ocean, You can't. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So don't worry about the whole path. Worry about the next step in front of you. And if the topic at hand is something political or something, if it's gospel related, I would go there first. I would make sure you know the gospel very well. You can recite and talk about the gospel very easily and fluidly, but otherwise, let life happen and address things as they come up. None of us is going to be an expert on everything. And I don't think that we should try to be or want to be. There are experts in various fields. Let's go and learn what we can from those experts. But in the meantime, we need to avoid those two extremes of utter hopelessness, that we can never know anything, and then of absolute certainty, because those will both lead us into trouble, and not to take us any place good. And in the heart, the difficult thing about being very certain and then finding out you're wrong is that your whole world kind of gets shattered. But when you honestly get used to saying authentically and truthfully, I don't know. There is such a liberty in that. There's such a freedom in that. It doesn't mean stay in that position and never know. But it is it's a humble thing to admit that you don't know. It's an endearing thing to admit that you don't know. And it's often a true thing to admit that you don't know. Some people will come to me expecting as a pastor that I'll have opinions about everything. And I do have opinions about a lot of things. But if it's a topic I've never spent any time researching or thinking about in any sort of depth, I often will start by saying, you know what, I've never spent enough time on that subject to have a meaningful or substantive opinion about it. And I don't want to mislead you in thinking that I do. I know there's a temptation. There's certainly a temptation when you're the person people are coming to, like the guru. You're supposed to know everything. I've never been smart enough to be that guy. I suppose early on I wanted to be that guy, and there's a part of me that still does. But I know now enough that I never will know everything. And for those of you that have sat under my teaching for any length of time, you've probably heard this this analogy that I use. But I like to think of learning like you're in a hallway in this big mansion, this big building. You're in a hallway, and there's, as far as you can see, there's just doors on either side. Maybe 100 doors on each side, and each room represents a thing that you can learn. You can master a subject or a micro subject or of some sort, and so as you go room by room, you're going down this hall, and by the time you get to the last couple rooms, you've closed the second to last door. You're getting ready to open that last door, and you're so confident. You've mastered all these things. You've been through all these rooms, and you have this new confidence about you. I have conquered everything that there is to learn. And as you begin to open that door, you crack it open just wide enough to find that it's another hallway with another couple hundred doors. Now, I don't know how many hallways it takes for you to reconcile the idea that maybe I don't know that much. I don't know that each hallway is not going to end with me opening the last door to find 100 more doorways or 200 more doorways. But at some point we have to reckon with that. And the earlier that we do that, the better off that we are, the more humble we are, and honest with ourselves, what we know and what we don't know. And the more relatable we will be to other people, and approachable, and we'll be seen as a place that's, honest and humble enough to say, I don't know, but not just leave it that way, but say, I don't know, but let's look into it together. Maybe you and I can work together to come to whatever our opinions might be, and maybe they're different. But it's an endearing thing to say, I don't know. It's a humble thing to say, I don't know. And very, very often it's an honest thing to say, I don't know. So don't hate the idea of saying, I don't know, and don't hate the idea of being wrong, because we all have been, and we all will continue to be. One of my favorite quotes is, and I'll end with this, but one of my favorite quotes is from Tom Wright, or you might know him from his author's name, N.T. Wright. And he says this, and I just love it. But he says this, I'm wrong about 20% of what I believe. The problem is I don't know which 20% it is. So I have to keep studying to make that 20% smaller. And this is a guy who knows his Bible in Greek and Hebrew, and has written more commentaries than I've read. So don't be afraid to say I don't know. It's endearing, it's humble, and it's often true. So let's just get used to it together. Hope this is helpful.